Hello, Sanctuary family. I thought it might be fun for us to try and make our own communion bread. Of course, it's possible for you to go to one of the 6 pickup spots, including my own house, where you could just pick up the little wafer, which tastes a little like styrofoam, and the little juice cup, and just have communion that way this Sunday. But otherwise, a fun family activity or solo baking activity might be to make it yourself. And I found a very easy recipe, which is foolproof, and where you can produce your own communion bread very quickly. This is the unleavened bread for communion recipe on All Recipes. And the one thing I really like about it is that you can adjust the number of servings that you want, and it will fix all of the ingredient amounts. The first step says to preheat my oven to 425 and to line a baking sheet with parchment paper. Wax paper is not the same as parchment paper, so don't use wax paper in the event you don't have parchment paper. If you don't have parchment paper, no big deal. Just use a baking sheet and lightly spray it with cooking. The next step says to mix the flour, the oil, and the salt together in a bowl. Here's my 2/3 cup of flour, and then here's my oil, which I'll be using 3 tablespoons and 1 3/4 teaspoons of oil. I am going to use olive oil instead of vegetable oil. You can use either. I just think the olive oil will taste a little bit better. And similarly, I am substituting salt too. You can use regular salt, but I have chosen to use garlic salt, and I'm going to use 1/8 of a teaspoon for that. So here are the flour, the salt, and the oil, and then I'm just going to mix them together in this bowl, and then get ready to add in the water in just a moment. After you have mixed your flour, your salt, and your oil together, it will be a crumbly, moist mixture that looks like this. Now you're ready to add the water, and so you need to add an equal amount as you did the oil, which is 3 tablespoons plus 1 3/4 tablespoons of water. It will look pretty soggy after you add the water, but then you combine it to make the dough of the bread. Now, the recipe does call for using a pastry blender, which is what this implement is, but if you don't have that, an exciting fork will suffice. This is what your dough will look like after it has been fully mixed, and now you can press it into discs and bake it. So, I have taken a piece of saran wrap and put it onto a flat surface with my dough on top of it, and now you can shape it as you wish and then transfer the shapes to the pan. You could do a circle with a cross on top. You could use a cookie cutter if you'd like. There are so many different things you could do to make it interesting for you and your family. I happen to have a heart-shaped cookie cutter, a tiny one, and so I thought it might be fun to make a few heart-shaped communion breads and put those on my baking sheet as well. Here are my finished little shaped breads. I thought to make just circles with a cross pressed into them, and I used just the back side of a knife. And then who wouldn't like to have tiny little communion loaves? So I made 4 little mini loaves, and then I used my heart-shaped cookie cutter to make 4 little heart-shaped communion bread. And for the recipe that had 4 servings, look at all the dough I had left over. So maybe we could even downsize, although this bread recipe did say that you could freeze it and it would be fine too. So you could just make a little batch of this and then save it for future communion Sundays. The last step is to go ahead and bake the bread for 8 to 10 minutes in my preheated oven, and so we'll see how it turns out. Here are the communion bread now that they've come out of the oven, and they are very pale, but you can sort of poke them with a fork to see if you feel they are done. If you take a look at the underside of the bread, you can see they're lightly browned, and so that's another sign that they are done.